The story. 6 years ago, my now ex-husband, 30 years old, and I, 29 years old, separated, just 6 months after welcoming our son into the world. Prior to our separation, we had been married for a year and a half, and our relationship had its roots in a 2-year college romance. Our common friend, let's call him Dan, a fake name, played matchmaker and set us up during our college years. Things initially seemed perfect. I held the belief that my ex-husband was flawless in every way, leading to our quick decision to marry and start a family. We were on a positive trajectory, ticking off items from our shared bucket list. We even purchased a house a month after our son was born, celebrating the occasion with friends, including Dan. However, our blissful moment took an unexpected turn during the celebration. Dan, perhaps fueled by excessive drinking, pulled me aside and confessed his love for me. Shockingly, he even proposed that we elope, suggesting he was willing to adopt my son if that was the only way for us to be together. I was utterly repulsed and disgusted by his behavior, leading me to promptly inform my ex-husband and have Dan removed from our home. Despite thinking that this would be the end of the matter, my ex-husband's behavior took a strange and distant turn. He began working late into the night, arriving home at odd hours, seemingly trying to distance himself from our family. Even more troubling was his newfound distance from our son. A week later, I confronted him about his peculiar behavior. Initially, he insisted that everything was fine, but eventually, he broached the subject of Dan's revelation at the party. To my dismay, my ex-husband expressed doubt about the nature of my relationship with Dan. He found it hard to believe that we hadn't been romantically involved in the past due to our close friendship. While it was true that Dan and I were once good friends during college, we had naturally grown apart after graduation. I felt deeply offended by my ex-husband's lack of trust in me. Perhaps fueled by pregnancy hormones, I lashed out at him for even suggesting that I had lied to him about such a sensitive matter. The argument escalated into a heated dispute, and my ex-husband demanded a paternity test for our baby, questioning whether he was the biological father.
Typically, I wouldn't hesitate about a paternity test, but my ex-husband's insistence felt like an accusation of infidelity. I had been nothing but faithful, having even borne a child with him. I couldn't fathom why he doubted me. Unwilling to endure a relationship lacking trust, I made the decision to end our marriage. I didn't want my son to grow up in an environment tainted by suspicion and unhappiness. That very night, I packed up my belongings and moved in with my mother. My father had passed away 3 years before my son was born, leaving my mother living alone. I thought my presence would be a welcome company for her. And indeed, she was supportive of my decision, affirming that I was doing the right thing. The next day, I initiated divorce proceedings and applied for full custody of my son. Surprisingly, my ex-husband didn't contest the divorce and even went so far as to terminate his parental rights within 6 months. The divorce proceedings concluded, and I heard nothing more from my ex-husband. With a settlement of $70,000, I saw it as an opportunity to start anew, creating a better life for myself and my son. A few weeks after the divorce was finalized, I returned to work, as my maternity leave had concluded. Balancing the demands of being a newly divorced single mother was challenging, and the guilt was overwhelming. Nevertheless, I committed to working hard without compromising the time I spent with my son. Somehow, I managed to power through the difficulties. During the initial months post-divorce, I stayed at my mother's place. However, I eventually decided to get my own apartment, aiming for independence and not wanting to overstay my welcome, especially as my mother was aging. Despite her protests, I moved out and hired a full-time nanny to care for my son. The first few years following the divorce unfolded this way. Fast forward 6 years, and I find myself in a much larger apartment, holding a higher position in the same company for a more substantial paycheck. Reflecting on my journey, I feel a sense of pride for what I've achieved. My son has everything he needs, and I am grateful to be able to provide for him. While I've moved on from my failed marriage and had a few dates and flings, serious relationships have eluded me. Despite my mother's insistence on finding a new husband and remarrying, I'm content focusing on being a mother for now. It's just my son and me, and I assume it will remain that way until I find someone I truly connect with and feel ready for marriage. However, A few days ago, our lives took an unexpected turn with the sudden reappearance of my ex-husband. Since our divorce, I hadn't heard from him, and a couple of friends had informed me that he had moved to Australia a few months after our separation. His sudden appearance at my doorstep caught me completely off guard. I wasn't even aware he had found me. Overcoming the initial shock, I made it clear that I wasn't willing to speak to him, insisting he leave. He expressed a desire to apologize and explain his side of the story before departing. Intrigued but hesitant, I agreed to hear him out, but I insisted we talk elsewhere, especially with my son in the vicinity. It all unfolded on the weekend, and since it was Saturday, I couldn't engage in the conversation right away. We agreed to meet at a nearby restaurant the next day. During our meeting, my ex-husband finally opened up about what transpired all those years ago, and the revelations left me in an unexpected situation. He initiated the conversation with an apology, acknowledging a colossal mistake. According to him, my mother played a significant role in our divorce. After I informed him about Dan's confession and subsequently kicked him out, my mother reached out to him a few hours after the party ended. What she said was mind-boggling. She asserted that Dan and I were involved during our college days and that she was certain of it. Additionally, she alleged that I had likely cheated on my ex-husband with Dan, but now that Dan seemed to be in love with me, I was afraid of ending the affair and had thrown Dan under the bus to get rid of him. Essentially, my mother fed my ex-husband a concoction of falsehoods, casting doubt on my loyalty. Refusing the paternity test from his perspective appeared as an admission of guilt, pushing him to leave me a few weeks later. Unbeknownst to me, Dan had contacted him through social media, providing several screenshots of his conversations with my mother leading up to the housewarming party where everything unraveled. The shocking revelation was that my mother had promised Dan that she would pave the way for him, assuring him that my marriage wouldn't last much longer. In return, Dan pledged to pay my mother $30,000 to make it happen. The horror hit me when I verified the authenticity of the chats. My mother always signed her texts with an E, her first initial. The realness of the conversations was undeniable. Dan's attempt to manipulate the situation failed, even though he, being a trust fund baby accustomed to getting his way, sought to orchestrate my divorce in his favor. However, as you already know, I never ended up with Dan and haven't spoken to him since the day he was ousted from our party. The sudden reappearance of this information, orchestrated by Dan, has turned my world completely upside down. The more I reflected on the situation, the more absurd and yet strangely coherent it became. My mother's unusually cheerful and overly supportive demeanor during my divorce now made sense. Despite her typically conservative views, she had been strangely empathetic towards Dan, insisting that he deserved another chance to make things right with me. I consistently shut down these discussions because, truth be told, I never liked Dan. While he may have been enjoyable in college, he was an entitled man-child and certainly not my type. Adding to the suspicion, my mother attempted to set me up with a couple of her friends' sons after the divorce. These potential suitors were corporate employees with substantial paychecks, but lacked any real personality. It seemed evident that she desired a wealthy husband for me. At the time of my divorce, my ex-husband and I were doing well, but we were far from being classified as rich. Even the house we purchased was funded by my in-laws, myself, and my ex-husband. It took the collective effort of the four of us to afford a modest home in a decent neighborhood. We were comfortable, but not affluent. My mother, who had always emphasized the importance of money, evidently took matters into her own hands. What surprised me the most was not her financial focus, but the fact that she had no qualms about sabotaging her own daughter's relatively happy marriage and depriving her grandson of his father for 6 long years, all because she believed I needed a wealthy husband. When my ex-husband presented me with the screenshots and chats between Dan and my mother, I was genuinely stunned. After collecting my thoughts, I informed him that we'd talk later and promptly left the restaurant. I drove straight to my mother's house, determined to confront her about the shocking revelations I had just discovered. I got straight to the point when she opened the door. At first, she tried to deny it, but it was evident that she was getting flustered. Eventually, she broke down and confessed that she had agreed to help Dan all those years ago. At that time, she was in desperate need of money. Having been a stay-at-home mom all her life, she found herself struggling with bills after my dad passed away. While the money he left her sustained her for a while, it became increasingly challenging to survive on those savings. She explained that she had considered asking me for help, but I had recently purchased a house and had a baby. I frequently complained about the expenses, so she felt hesitant to turn to me. Despite searching for jobs for months, she had been rejected everywhere due to her lack of work experience. As a last resort, she agreed to help Dan, who had approached her a couple of weeks before the party. Her original plan was to put in a good word for Dan after manipulating my husband into leaving me. However, Dan had acted prematurely, confessing his love while intoxicated. She couldn't salvage the situation, despite her attempts. Even after that, she continued trying to set me up with wealthy men, hoping to alleviate her guilt for ruining my happy marriage. However, none of her efforts were successful. She expressed remorse and claimed she intended to tell me the truth eventually, but not in this manner. She tried to convince me that she had done it for my own good, emphasizing that Dan was well off and we wouldn't have had to worry about money if I had ended up with him. According to her, she had been looking out for me and she pleaded with me not to take it to heart. However, I found it challenging to believe that my own mother would betray me in such a way. I left feeling disgusted and horrified by the revelations, and since then, I haven't been to see her. I've also chosen not to respond to her calls and texts because I'm at a loss for words. My emotions are all over the place, making it difficult to block her, even though she bombards me with texts every day. I inform my ex-husband that I need time to recover from everything I've uncovered, and thankfully, he respects that. One text from my mother hit me harder than the rest. She expressed that, regardless of her past actions, she still wished the best for me. However, she emphasized that she had to look out for herself as an individual. She explained that she did what she had to do to survive on her own, regretting it now, but acknowledging it was done. According to her, she refrained from asking me for help because she believed my ex-husband and I didn't make enough money to cover all the expenses, including hers. Out of sheer desperation, she made those choices. She assured me that she has been trying to make amends and would continue doing so for the rest of her life if necessary. This particular message brought tears to my eyes. I've spent my entire life with this woman, and in one day, my world was turned upside down. I feel genuinely lost right now. Am I in the wrong for not offering to help my mother when she was struggling with money after my dad passed away? Update 1. Hello. It's been 4 days since I posted, and I wanted to express my gratitude to everyone for their kindness and advice. I'm in a much better emotional state now, and I'm thankful that I didn't respond to my mother earlier. Regardless of her reasons or what she was going through, the bottom line is that she ruined my marriage and deprived my son of a father for 6 years. I can't find any justification for her actions, and her attempt to gaslight me into accepting her past behavior as okay was the last straw. I genuinely don't care about her reasons. If she had opened up about her struggles and asked for help, I would have supported her. However, she chose to sabotage my marriage for her own financial gain. Her attempt to make amends by setting me up with her friend's wealthy sons is revolting. I used to put her on a pedestal and even considered myself in the wrong, thanks to her convincing gaslighting. But that's behind me now. I won't apologize or let her manipulate me any longer. After my promotion, I've been the one taking care of her and she's been living off my money. This will stop now. I appreciate everyone here who took the time to reassure me that I wasn't the villain for not offering help I didn't know she needed. To those wondering about Dan's sudden revelation after so many years, I spoke to some friends and discovered he's become a bitter alcoholic with 2 divorces in the past 6 years. My best guess is that he realized I wouldn't come running to him, no matter how lonely I was, and decided to stir up drama. While I'm not entirely sure of his motives, I don't think it matters. He did it, and I'm still grappling with whether the repercussions have been good or bad. Likely a bit of both. Update 2. Today, I took a significant step forward by blocking my mother on all platforms and instructing my assistant to stop the monthly payments to her. It feels like a massive weight has been lifted off my shoulders, and I can finally breathe a little. The past week has been emotionally tumultuous, but I've made it through. Now, my main concern is figuring out how to explain to my son why we won't be visiting his grandmother on weekends anymore. I hope he doesn't bring it up, as it would be challenging for both of us. I haven't fully processed the magnitude of what I've been through and what I've had to do, but I believe I'll come to terms with it someday. My priority is sparing my son from unnecessary pain. He has already endured 6 years without his father, and now he faces the prospect of the rest of his childhood without his beloved grandma. It won't be easy, but it's a necessary step. I know I can never go back to having a normal and cordial relationship with my mother. I didn't even read the last couple of messages she sent before I blocked her, because I knew nothing she could say would make me stay. I'm done, and it's a permanent decision. I wish my mother had loved me half as much as I loved her. Perhaps we wouldn't be in this awful situation today. However, she chose this path, keeping a massive secret for years, and then attempting to gaslight me into thinking I was somehow at fault. It's infuriating, and every time I dwell on it, my heart breaks into 1,000 pieces. The betrayal, hurt, and anger are overwhelming. Yet, I realize I can't change the past, so my only option is to move on. I'm choosing to let go of my mother and all the resentment so that I don't carry it with me for the rest of my life. I've also taken the proactive step of looking into therapists near me. I strongly believe it would be immensely beneficial at this point. Desperate for support, especially given my career and life stage, I cannot afford to break down or let myself spiral into depression. Therapy seems to be the best way to navigate through these challenging times. Update 3. So, some of you have been curious about how I was going to handle the situation with my ex-husband. I realized I forgot to mention it earlier, my bad. Anyway, I did get back to him, and we had a discussion about what to do next now that the truth was out there. Rekindling our relationship was out of the question for obvious reasons. He abandoned me, doubted me, and picked unnecessary fights, leading to our divorce. He did admit he was an idiot, but that doesn't change much for me. Personally, I don't want any equation with him. However, he practically begged me to let him have a shot at being a dad. He regretted not being part of his son's life for so long. Despite my reservations, I considered it for the sake of my son, who often asked about his father. Now that he finally has a chance at having a father, I felt they both deserved an opportunity for a real father-son relationship. Of course, I set restrictions and rules. He can't just reappear and take over dad duties without testing the waters first. For now, he's allowed to meet my son once a week for a couple of supervised hours. They've had 2 visits, and surprisingly, things seem to be going well. My ex and my son get along, building a good relationship in a short time. My son isn't fully aware of who this man is yet. All he knows is that he's fun to be around. If things continue to go well, we'll slowly phase him into the whole father thing. My ex mentioned moving back here if I agree to co-parent or grant him joint custody, or at least visitation rights. I've cautioned him not to get ahead of himself. But truth be told, it's heartening to see them bond. I'm thrilled for my son, and I hope their relationship flourishes. Stay tuned for more stories from our channel.